Yeah, the government have shown utter disrespect for democracy this week in barrelling through a deluge of legislation, guillotined without proper scrutiny. It's a cynical tactic, and it shows contempt both for this House and for the people of this country. And some of us have protested, John, very strongly at the Business Committee about this, but it isn't a democracy, unfortunately, the Business Committee, and the government does what it likes. And they have shown further contempt for this House and far more importantly for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of workers, of students, of pensioners, of low and middle income households by failing to take serious measures to protect them from the crushing cost of living crisis and housing and homelessness crisis that is really imposing terrible suffering on people at the moment, by going off on this summer recess without taking serious emergency measures to address that, and then today not even having the respect to stay for 2 hours for the last opportunity TDs have in here to present the concerns and hardships and difficulties that people out there are facing before the budget. It is utterly disrespectful. And it's why I am very glad that the Cost of Living Coalition, which is a coalition precisely of pensioners, of students, of trade unionists, of single parents groups, of travellers groups and so on, have named the date for what I hope will be a massive national demonstration to put manners on this government on Saturday, August the 24th. Because when the government shows that level of disrespect, where not only do they not take measures to respond to a dire cost of living and housing crisis, but they won't even stay to listen to those who are trying to present those concerns on the last day of the dole. The only answer to that is people power. The same as we had to do on the water charges to get people out on the streets. And I sincerely hope we will have tens of thousands out on the streets to send that message to this government before the budget and they make their final decisions on that budget. And what that demonstration is demanding is that when workers, pensioners and students have effectively had their incomes and wages cut by 10%, because that's what inflation means. People are being made poorer, and in fact, the less well off you are, the more you're being made poorer, because the cost of living increases in energy, in heating, in electricity, in petrol, in food, in diesel, in housing disproportionately hurt the people who are least able to deal with it. So we are demanding, and people on the streets will be demanding, that as an absolute minimum, the government inflation-proofs people's incomes, that we see wages increase, we see pensions increase, we see student grants increase, we see social welfare benefits, disability payments, fuel allowances, living alone allowances, children's allowances, all of those things that keep people, potentially at least, out of poverty, though many are being driven into poverty, that they are increased at least to the level of inflation, and indeed that many of those who are denied those supports because they are marginally or a little bit above income thresholds and are driven over a cliff when their incomes go over those thresholds and get no support. And I am absolutely furious that this government has broken its promise to review the social housing income thresholds. They promised we would have an announcement on that before the summer break. They've gone off. And as the ERSI pointed out, 10 years ago, 47% of households in this country were entitled to social housing and social housing support. I mean, you'd be lucky to get a council house, but at least you might get some financial support through HAPS and RAS, but the number has dropped from 47% to 33%, a massive stealth cut where working people who used to get some support from the state, who cannot afford the extortionate rents, the extortionate house prices, would at least get some financial support, and that has been slashed. And the government have done nothing, even though they are sitting on the review on that for 5 years now. The review was published in December of last year, and yet they won't show us the results of it. So it's a nasty, nasty stealth cut, but also all sorts of other thresholds. I raised this week the case of a former on-post worker, now a pensioner, who's getting a semi-state pension, and that's all he gets, which is below the official poverty line, the CSO poverty line. Not entitled to fuel allowance, not entitled to living alone allowance, not entitled to the household benefits package. It's absolutely disgusting. So those thresholds need to be raised so that the people who need help more than ever, they were struggling before this cost of living crisis, but now they are being absolutely crucified, and many of them are being denied any support at all. And those who are getting support, it is totally inadequate, because in reality, the income they're getting, the supports they're getting, are worth 10%, if not more, less than they were before. On the question of the housing crisis, here's a proposal, and you know, I mean, this is where I'm really furious, frankly. I mean, no disrespect to you, Malcolm, but you're the Minister for Heritage and Electoral Reform. What on earth are you doing taking this debate rather than the Minister for Finance or the Minister for Public Expenditure? So really, I'm talking to the officials who hopefully will pass on some proposals. One of the main narratives the government have come out with is to say we have all this extra corporate tax revenue, but we can't spend it because it's not a sustainable source of revenue. It's vulnerable to possible changes, so we can't actually use it to shield people from the cost of living and housing crisis that is absolutely crushing them. Now, here's a suggestion for you. Here's a sustainable way to spend that money and simultaneously address the crisis. Use that money to buy up the empty properties that are lying around the country. 35,000 rental properties, 45,000 houses or so estimated by the CSO, sitting there empty when we are facing the worst housing and homelessness crisis in the history of the state. Buy them. We have one of the lowest levels. Now, that's a good investment. It's not a dangerous investment, because it's capital, it's adding to the capital stock, it's adding to the housing stock, it's reducing potentially the amount of HAP payments we have to put out, and it is an asset for the state. And it is an asset for the state when we have some of the lowest levels of social housing provision in Europe. 9% is the proportion of our housing stock that's social housing. In Austria, it's 25%. In Denmark, it's 19%. That's why, and this is an important point for people in this country to know, everywhere in Europe is being affected by the Ukrainian crisis. Everywhere is seeing some increases in the cost of living and the cost of housing, but we are far worse than anywhere else. Because we have a lower proportion of social housing, because we don't have rent controls which they have in most of the rest of Europe, because most of the rest of Europe index links social payments, pensions and so on, so they are shielded against the impact of inflation and cost of living crisis. So don't hide behind the Ukrainian crisis. Electricity prices in this country, 26% higher than the EU average. Housing and utility prices, 78% higher than the EU average. Rents in this country have gone up 70% in the last 10 years, 19% in the last 2 years. Comparison in Europe over the last 10 years, 13%. A fraction of what has happened. So there's something fundamentally dysfunctional. And this is a key point people need to emphasise about the cost of living and housing crisis. Huge numbers of workers, students and pensioners are suffering, but some people are gaining. For some people, it's not a crisis, it's a bonanza. It's a bonanza for the investment funds. It's a bonanza for the vulture funds. It's a bonanza for the energy companies. It's a bonanza for the big food distribution companies. It's a bonanza for the property speculators. They are making a fortune. And yet this government won't even contemplate some redistributive taxes, windfall taxes, which even the Johnson government was willing to do under pressure, albeit, to have some windfall taxes to redistribute some of the super profits being made by these corporations to protect ordinary people from a crushing cost of living and housing crisis.
Thank you very much, Deputy Boyd Barrett.